The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus wheeled his cart through the produce section of the Walmart on 5th Street. It was Tuesday evening, around 7:30, and the store was quieter than usual. He had just finished his shift at the auto repair shop and needed to pick up groceries for the week. His hands still smelled faintly of motor oil despite washing them twice with the industrial soap they kept in the break room. Marcus had been shopping at this particular Walmart for 3 years, ever since he moved to the neighborhood after his divorce. He knew the layout by heart, could navigate the aisles even when they rearranged things during their periodic resets. The staff recognized him too. Janet at checkout 3 always asked about his daughter Emma, who visited every other weekend. Carlos from the deli section would save him the good cuts of turkey when he came in on Thursdays. Tonight felt different though. There was an energy in the air, a kind of tension he could not quite identify. Maybe it was the weather. The local news had been predicting storms all week, and the humidity made everything feel sticky and uncomfortable. Or maybe it was just him. Work had been particularly stressful lately with 3 mechanics calling in sick and a backlog of vehicles that seemed to grow every day. As he rounded the corner from produce into the cereal aisle, Marcus noticed a woman standing in front of the breakfast foods. She was probably in her 40s, with shoulder-length brown hair that looked like it needed washing. Her clothes were worn but clean, a faded blue sweater and dark jeans that had seen better days. She held a small piece of paper in one hand and a calculator in the other, moving slowly along the shelves and stopping to examine prices. Marcus continued shopping, grabbing the usual items from his mental list. Milk, bread, eggs, some frozen dinners for the nights when he worked late. He was comparing prices on pasta sauce when he heard a quiet sniffling sound. The woman from the cereal aisle had moved to the canned goods section just 2 aisles over. She was still holding her calculator, but now she was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. He minded his own business at first. Everyone had bad days, and grocery shopping could be stressful when money was tight. Marcus knew that feeling well. After the divorce, when he was paying alimony and child support while trying to keep up with rent on his 1-bedroom apartment, there had been plenty of times when he stood in store aisles calculating whether he could afford both toilet paper and laundry detergent in the same trip. But something about the woman's quiet desperation tugged at him. She was being so careful not to attract attention, trying to manage her emotions while going about the mundane task of shopping. There was a dignity in her struggle that reminded him of his own mother, who had worked 2 jobs to raise him, and his sister after their father left when Marcus was 12. Marcus finished in the pasta aisle and moved on to household items. He needed dish soap and paper towels. As he was comparing brands, he heard the woman's voice for the first time. She was talking to someone on her phone, speaking in hushed tones. "I know, sweetie. I know you're hungry," she was saying. "Mommy's at the store right now, trying to figure out dinner. Can you be patient just a little bit longer?" There was a pause while she listened to whoever was on the other end. "No, honey, we can't have pizza tonight. Maybe this weekend, okay? I'm looking at what we can make with what we have at home." Another pause. "I love you too, baby. Put your sister on the phone for just a second." Marcus pretended to study the ingredients on a bottle of all-purpose cleaner while listening. He was not trying to eavesdrop, but in the quiet store, voices carried. "Hi, sweetheart," the woman continued, her voice taking on a slightly different tone, the way parents adjust when talking to children of different ages. "Are you being good for your brother?" "Good. Yes, Mommy will be home soon. Can you help David heat up some soup for dinner? The cans are in the cabinet next to the refrigerator." She ended the call and stood there for a moment, staring at her phone. Then, she looked back at her list and calculator. Marcus watched as she put back a container of orange juice she had been holding, then picked up a store-brand box of crackers instead. He moved to the next aisle, telling himself it was none of his business. The woman seemed to have things under control. She was making responsible choices, prioritizing needs over wants. It was admirable, really. A lot of people could learn from that kind of discipline. But, as he selected his usual brand of coffee, Marcus could not shake the image of the woman's face when she was talking to her children. There was love there, and worry, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to hold everything together when the foundation keeps shifting underneath you. He had been there. Maybe not in exactly the same circumstances, but close enough. Those first months after Lisa left, when he was learning to be a single parent every other weekend while managing a household budget that had suddenly become much tighter. The way Emma would ask for things he could not afford, and how he would have to explain why they could not go to the movies or buy the name brand cereal she liked. Marcus finished his shopping and headed toward the front of the store. He had everything on his list except one item, shampoo, which he could pick up next week if he had to. As he walked past the pharmacy section, he saw the woman again.
I'm here.
She was standing in front
I
of a
can't do
display
this.
of children's medicine, holding a box and reading the label carefully. "Excuse me," she said to a passing employee, a young man in a blue vest who looked like he was probably still in high school. "Do you know if there's a difference between this one and the name brand? My daughter has a fever, and I want to make sure I get the right thing." The employee looked at the box she was holding. "They're the same active ingredient, ma'am. The generic works just as well, according to the pharmacist. It's just a lot cheaper." "Thank you," she said, managing a small smile. "That's very helpful." But when the employee moved on, Marcus saw her check the price tag again and then look at her calculator. Even the generic medicine was apparently stretching her budget thin. She stood there for a long moment, weighing her options. That was when Marcus made his decision. He could not walk away and wonder later if that little girl got the medicine she needed. Some situations called for action, not just sympathy. His mother had taught him that when she used to send care packages to their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who lived alone and rarely had visitors. "Excuse me," Marcus said, approaching the woman. "I couldn't help but notice you're shopping for your kids." She looked up, immediately wary. Marcus realized he probably looked intimidating, a large man with calloused hands and work clothes approaching a woman who was clearly vulnerable. He softened his voice and took a step back to give her space. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to intrude. I have a daughter myself, and I remember what it was like when money was tight and she got sick. If you need help with the medicine, I'd be happy to cover it." The woman's first instinct was clearly to refuse. She straightened up and shook her head quickly. "That's very kind of you, but I couldn't accept that. We're fine, really." "I'm sure you are," Marcus said gently. "But sometimes fine doesn't mean we couldn't use a little help. There's no shame in it. I've been there myself." She studied his face, trying to read his intentions. Marcus waited patiently. He understood the internal struggle she was having. Pride versus necessity. The desire to maintain dignity versus the need to care for her children. "Why would you want to help a complete stranger?" she asked finally. Marcus thought about how to answer that. "Because somebody helped me once when I needed it. At a gas station, actually. My car had broken down, which was ironic since I'm a mechanic. But I was broke and had no way to get to work the next day. A stranger paid for my tow truck and didn't want anything in return except for me to help someone else when I could." This was true. It had happened about 2 years ago, during a particularly rough patch when several unexpected expenses had hit at once. The man had been driving a nice car and wearing expensive clothes, but he had not made Marcus feel small or embarrassed about accepting help. The woman glanced down at her calculator again, then back at Marcus. "I have 3 kids at home," she said quietly. "Sarah has a fever, and David is trying to take care of the girls while I'm here. I thought I had enough for everything, but the milk was more expensive than I expected, and—" She did not finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. It was the familiar math of making ends meet, where every dollar had to be accounted for and unexpected price increases could throw off an entire budget. "Let me get the medicine," Marcus said. "And maybe some soup for Sarah? Chicken soup always helped when my daughter was sick." The woman's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than frustration. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Marcus Williams." "Sarah," she replied, shaking his hand. "Sarah Chun." The name struck Marcus as familiar, but he could not place where he might have heard it before. She was probably thinking of his elderly neighbor from childhood, Mrs. Chun. It was a common enough name. "Okay, Sarah," Marcus said. "Let's get what your daughter needs." They walked through the store together, Sarah pointing out a few additional items that would help with her grocery list for the week. Marcus was careful not to be too generous or make her feel like charity case. Just the medicine, some soup, and a loaf of bread to replace the generic one she had selected with something a little nicer. At the checkout, Sarah tried again to pay for her own items, but Marcus insisted. Please, he said, let me do this. You can pay it forward to someone else when you get the chance. The total came to $63.47. For Marcus, it was manageable, the equivalent of what he might spend on dinner and a movie. But he could see what it meant to Sarah. She kept thanking him, her voice thick with emotion. My kids are going to ask who you are, she said as they walked toward the parking lot. What should I tell them? Tell them there are still good people in the world, Marcus suggested. And that when they grow up, they should be the kind of people who help others when they can. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes one more time. I will. I promise I will. They parted ways in the parking lot. Marcus watched Sarah load her groceries into an older model Honda Civic that had seen better days, but was clean and well-maintained. She waved goodbye and drove off into the night. Marcus loaded his own groceries and drove home to his apartment 3 days after the encounter at Walmart. Marcus was elbow-deep in the engine of a 2018 Toyota Camry when his phone rang. He almost ignored it, figuring it was probably another customer wanting to know when their car would be ready. The storm had caused several accidents around town, and the shop was busier than usual with insurance claims and weather-related repairs. But something made him wipe his hands on his coveralls and check the caller ID. It was an unknown number with a local area code. Against his better judgment, he answered. Marcus Williams, he said, tucking the phone between his ear and shoulder while reaching for a wrench. Mr. Williams? This is Detective Rodriguez with the Metro Police Department. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to talk. Marcus straightened up immediately. Is everything okay? Did something happen to my daughter? No, sir, nothing like that. This is about an incident that occurred Tuesday evening at the Walmart on 5th Street. We're hoping you might be able to help us with some information. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Had something happened to Sarah? He had thought about her several times over the past few days, wondering how her daughter was feeling and whether the medicine had helped. The idea that she might be in trouble made him feel sick. What kind of incident? He asked carefully. Could we meet in person to discuss it? I know you're probably at work, but this is fairly important. I could come by your shop if that would be convenient. Marcus looked around at the cars waiting for repairs, then at his boss Jerry, who was dealing with an irate customer at the front counter. Actually, I can take a break. How about the coffee shop 2 blocks down? Grind coffee. I can be there in 15 minutes. That works. I'll be the guy in a blue suit sitting alone. Marcus told Jerry he needed to step out, changed out of his work coveralls, and walked to the coffee shop. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Sarah had gotten into an accident. Maybe someone had seen him helping her and reported it as suspicious activity. Maybe there had been some kind of misunderstanding about the receipt or the payment. Detective Rodriguez turned out to be a man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. He was already seated at a corner table with a cup of coffee when Marcus arrived. Marcus ordered a black coffee and joined him. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Williams. I want to start by saying you're not in any trouble. We're just trying to piece together some information about Tuesday evening. Okay, Marcus said cautiously. What exactly are you investigating? Detective Rodriguez pulled out a small notebook and flipped through a few pages. We understand you had an interaction with a woman named Sarah Chun at the Walmart on 5th Street around 8 p.m. on Tuesday. Is that correct? Yes, Marcus said slowly. I helped her buy some medicine for her daughter. Why? Is Sarah okay? The detective studied Marcus's face carefully. What can you tell me about this interaction? How did it come about? Marcus described the evening in detail, from first noticing Sarah in the cereal aisle to their conversation in the parking lot. He tried to be accurate about everything, though he found himself emphasizing that Sarah had been reluctant to accept help and that he had not pressured her in any way. And you had never met Mrs. Chun before Tuesday evening? The detective asked. Never. It was completely random. I just saw that she was struggling and wanted to help. Detective Rodriguez made some notes, then looked up at Marcus again. Mr. Williams, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Did Mrs. Chun mention anything about her work or her background during your conversation? Marcus thought back to their brief interaction. No, not really. She talked about her children, said she had 3 kids at home. She mentioned one of them was sick. But we didn't really discuss personal details beyond that. What? The detective was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, He leaned forward slightly. Mr. Williams, Sarah Chun is currently the subject of a federal investigation. She's been accused of embezzling money from her employer. A significant amount of money. Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach. What? That's impossible. You should have seen her at the store. She was counting every penny, calculating whether she could afford children's medicine. Someone who stole money wouldn't be struggling to buy groceries. That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you, Detective Rodriguez said. Your description of Mrs. Chun doesn't match what we would expect from someone who allegedly stole over $200,000 from the nonprofit organization where she worked as a financial administrator. $200,000. The number seemed absurd to Marcus. Sarah had been agonizing over the price difference between name brand and generic children's medicine. She had put back orange juice to stay within her budget. There has to be some mistake, Marcus said. Are you sure we're talking about the same person? Brown hair, about 40 years old, driving an older Honda Civic? Same person, the detective confirmed. The thing is, Mr. Williams, this case has some unusual aspects. The evidence against Mrs. Chun seems almost too convenient. And your account of her behavior on Tuesday doesn't fit with someone who has access to stolen funds. Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to process this information. So you think she's innocent? I think there are questions that need to be answered. And your testimony about her financial situation on Tuesday could be important. You're an objective witness who has no connection to the case. What exactly is she accused of? Detective Rodriguez consulted his notebook again. She worked for a nonprofit called Children's Future Foundation. They provide educational grants and support services for underprivileged kids. Mrs. Chin was responsible for processing grant payments and managing some of the financial records. The irony was not lost on Marcus. A woman accused of stealing money meant to help disadvantaged children was herself struggling to afford basic necessities for her own kids. The accusation is that she created false invoices and diverted grant money to personal accounts over a period of about 18 months. The total amount is around $250,000. But if she had stolen that much money, why would she be shopping with a calculator and putting back groceries she couldn't afford? Marcus asked. That's exactly what doesn't add up, the detective said. Either she's very good at hiding her spending, or something else is going on. Marcus thought about Sarah's phone conversation with her children, the careful way she had read the medicine labels, the genuine gratitude in her voice when he offered to help. She's innocent, he said firmly. I'm not a detective, but I know desperation when I see it. That woman was not putting on an act. Would you be willing to make a formal statement about what you observed on Tuesday evening? Absolutely. But can I ask you something? How did you even know I was there? How did you connect me to Sarah? Detective Rodriguez smiled slightly. Store security cameras. We were reviewing the footage from Tuesday evening as part of our investigation into Mrs. Chin's activities. We saw the interaction between you two and thought it might be relevant. So you've been investigating her for a while. The allegations came to light about a week ago. Mrs. Chin's supervisor discovered some discrepancies in the accounts and called in an audit. That's when the missing money was discovered. Marcus felt a surge of anger on Sarah's behalf. Has anyone considered that maybe her supervisor is the one who stole the money and is trying to pin it on her? That's certainly a possibility we're exploring. But, Mr. Williams, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but your interaction with Mrs. Chun was very brief. How can you be so certain about her character? It was a fair question, and Marcus considered it carefully. I've been in difficult financial situations myself, he said finally. I know what it looks like when someone is genuinely struggling versus when they're pretending to struggle. Sarah wasn't performing for anyone's benefit. She was embarrassed about needing help. She tried to refuse it multiple times. That's not the behavior of someone who has hundreds of thousands of dollars hidden away somewhere. They talked for another 20 minutes, with Detective Rodriguez asking detailed questions about every aspect of the interaction at Walmart. Marcus found himself remembering small details he had not thought significant at the time. The way Sarah had carefully folded her receipt and put it in a specific pocket of her purse, the fact that her phone looked several years old and had a cracked screen, the worn soles of her shoes. One more question, the detective said as they prepared to leave. Did Mrs. Chin mention anything about work stress or problems with her employer? Marcus thought back. No, nothing like that. She was focused on her kids and managing her immediate situation. She didn't talk about work at all. As they shook hands outside the coffee shop, Detective Rodriguez handed Marcus his business card. "If you think of anything else, please call me." "And Mr. Williams? You did a good thing on Tuesday evening. Regardless of how this case turns out, you helped a mother take care of her sick child. That matters." Marcus walked back to the auto shop with his head spinning. The woman he had helped by medicine was accused of stealing $250,000. It seemed impossible, but then, again, he barely knew her. Could he really judge someone's character based on a 15-minute interaction in a grocery store? But the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that Sarah was innocent. There had been something authentic about her struggle, something that could not be faked. The careful way she had managed her money, the love in her voice when she talked to her children, the dignity she maintained despite her obvious difficulties. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon distracted, making mistakes on routine repairs, and having to redo work he normally completed without thinking. Jerry asked if he was feeling okay, and Marcus mumbled something about not sleeping well because of the storm. That evening, he called his daughter Emma. She was at her mother's house for the week, and their usual Wednesday night phone call was one of the few routines from his marriage that had survived the divorce. "Dad, you sound weird," Emma said after they had talked about school and her upcoming soccer game. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about something that happened at work." "What happened?" Marcus hesitated. Emma was only 10, but she was perceptive and had always been a good listener. "I helped someone a few days ago, and now I found out they might be in trouble. I'm trying to decide if there's anything else I can do to help." "What kind of trouble?" "Someone thinks they did something bad, but I don't think they did." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember when Tyler Adams accused me of cheating on the math test last year?" Marcus remembered. Emma had been devastated by the accusation, which had turned out to be completely unfounded. The real cheater had eventually been caught, but not before Emma had endured several days of suspicion from her teacher and classmates. "I remember. That was really hard on you." "Yeah, but you believed me even before we could prove it. You said you knew I wouldn't cheat because you knew what kind of person I was." The parallel was not lost on Marcus. "You're right. And you know what? I was right to trust what I knew about you. So maybe you should trust what you know about this person too." Sometimes his 10-year-old daughter had a clearer view of right and wrong than most adults. After they hung up, Marcus found himself thinking about what Emma had said. He knew what kind of person Sarah was based on their brief interaction, just like he had known what kind of person Emma was based on 10 years of being her father. The question was what, if anything, he could do with that knowledge. Detective Rodriguez had taken his statement, but Marcus sensed there was more to the story. If Sarah was innocent, then someone else was guilty. And if someone else was guilty, they were perfectly content to let Sarah take the blame. Marcus spent the next several days thinking about how to help Sarah without overstepping boundaries or interfering with an official investigation. He was not a detective or a lawyer, just a mechanic who fixed cars and tried to mind his own business. But every time he thought about walking away from the situation, he remembered Sarah's voice on the phone with her children and the careful way she had counted every dollar in that store. On Saturday morning, while Emma was visiting for the weekend, Marcus made a decision. They were eating breakfast at their favorite diner when he brought up the subject. "Emma, remember what we talked about the other night? About helping someone who might be in trouble?" Emma looked up from her pancakes. "The person you think is innocent?" "Yeah, I was thinking about trying to help them, but it might take some time and research." "What do you think about that?" Emma considered this seriously. "Mom always says you should help people when you can. But she also says to be careful and not put yourself in danger. Your mom is smart. This wouldn't be dangerous, exactly, but it might be complicated. Are you going to become a detective, Dad?" Marcus laughed. "No, nothing like that. But sometimes regular people can notice things that investigators might miss." Emma nodded sagely. "Like when you figured out Mrs. Henderson's car was making noise because a squirrel built a nest in her engine, and the mechanic at the dealer said she needed a whole new transmission." Exactly like that. Sometimes a fresh perspective helps. They finished breakfast, and Marcus dropped Emma off at her mother's house. Then, he drove to the public library downtown. If he was going to help Sarah, he needed to understand more about her situation and the organization she worked for. The librarian helped him access newspaper archives and business records. Marcus spent the afternoon learning about Children's Future Foundation. It was a well-respected nonprofit that had been operating for over 20 years, providing educational grants to underprivileged children and funding after-school programs in low-income neighborhoods. The foundation's annual budget was around $3 million, with funding coming from private donors, government grants, and corporate sponsors. Sarah Chun had worked there for almost 5 years as a financial administrator, handling grant processing and maintaining donor records. Marcus found several newspaper articles about the foundation's work. They had helped thousands of children over the years, funding everything from college scholarships to tutoring programs. The executive director, a woman named Margaret Ross, was frequently quoted in articles about educational inequality and poverty. What struck Marcus as he read was how much good the organization did with relatively limited resources. Every dollar mattered when it came to helping disadvantaged kids. The idea that someone would steal from such an organization seemed particularly cruel. But, as Marcus dug deeper into the public records, he began to notice some interesting details. The foundation had undergone significant changes over the past 2 years. They had expanded their programs, hired new staff, and moved to a larger office space. All of this growth had happened under the supervision of a new operations manager named David Peterson, who had joined the organization about 3 years ago. Marcus made notes about the timeline. Sarah had been hired 5 years ago, but the alleged embezzlement had supposedly occurred over the past 18 months. That meant it had started about 6 months after David Peterson joined the organization. On Monday morning, Marcus called Detective Rodriguez. "Detective, this is Marcus Williams. We talked last week about Sarah Chun." "Mr. Williams, yes. Have you remembered something new about your interaction with Mrs. Chun?" "Not exactly. But I've been thinking about the case, and I wondered if you might be able to tell me a bit more about the timeline of the alleged theft." There was a pause. "Mr. Williams, I appreciate your concern, but this is an ongoing investigation. I can't really discuss details beyond what I've already shared." "I understand that. But I keep thinking about what I observed that night at Walmart. Sarah Chun was not acting like someone with access to stolen money. I did some research on the foundation, and I noticed they've had some significant changes in leadership recently." Another pause, longer this time. "What kind of research?" Marcus explained what he had found in the public records. "I'm not trying to interfere with your investigation. But what if you're looking at the wrong person?" "Mr. Williams, I have to ask, why are you so invested in this case?" "You met Mrs. Chun once, very briefly." It was a question Marcus had been asking himself. "Because I think she's innocent, and I think someone is taking advantage of that. Look, I know I'm just a mechanic, but I'm also a father. The idea of someone getting wrongly accused while their kids watch, it bothers me." Detective Rodriguez was quiet for several moments. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly. "Mr. Williams, can we meet again?" "Same coffee shop." They met that afternoon. This time, Detective Rodriguez looked tired and frustrated. He ordered a double espresso and rubbed his temples before speaking. "Mr. Williams, I'm going to share something with you, but I need you to keep it confidential. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded. "This case has been bothering me too. The evidence against Mrs. Chun is substantial, but it all feels too neat. Too convenient." "What kind of evidence?" "Electronic records showing transfers from foundation accounts to personal accounts linked to Mrs. Chun. Documentation of false invoices created using her computer login. Financial records showing unexplained deposits in her personal banking accounts." Marcus frowned. "But that could all be fabricated, right? If someone else had access to her computer or her personal information." "That's what I keep thinking. But Mrs. Chin's supervisor, David Peterson, insists the security protocols would make that very difficult." "David Peterson," Marcus repeated. "He's the operations manager who joined the organization about 3 years ago?" Detective Rodriguez looked surprised. "You did do research?" "Yes, that's right. And the alleged theft started about 6 months after he was hired." "How did you?" The detective stopped and looked at Marcus with new interest. "Mr. Williams, what exactly did you do before you became a mechanic?" "I've always been a mechanic. But my ex-wife was an accountant. I picked up a few things about financial records over the years." That was not entirely true. Marcus had actually taken several business classes before deciding to focus on automotive repair, and he had a natural aptitude for spotting patterns and inconsistencies. But he did not want to oversell his qualifications. Detective, has anyone looked closely at David Peterson's background? Of course. Standard background check when the allegations came to light. Nothing unusual. What about his finances? If someone was skimming money from the foundation, there should be signs of increased spending or unexplained wealth. Detective Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. Mr. Williams, I think you might have missed your calling. You're asking all the right questions. So, Peterson's finances appear normal. Modest salary from the foundation, reasonable expenses. He drives a used car, rents an apartment, no significant assets. Marcus thought about this. Maybe he's smarter than that. Maybe he's hiding the money somehow. Or maybe he's not the one stealing it. Or maybe Sarah Chen really is guilty, and I'm wrong about what I saw at Walmart. They sat in silence for a moment, both wrestling with the complexities of the case. Detective, can I ask you something? When did David Peterson first report the missing money? He discovered the discrepancies during a routine audit last Monday. He immediately reported it to Margaret Ross, the executive director, who called us. And when exactly did my encounter with Sarah happen? Detective Rodriguez consulted his notes. Tuesday evening, according to your statement. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. So David Peterson discovered the alleged theft on Monday. And on Tuesday, Sarah was at Walmart struggling to afford medicine for her sick daughter? That's right. Don't you think that's strange? If Sarah had been stealing money for 18 months, she would have had access to those funds on Tuesday. But she was clearly broke. Unless she had already moved the money somewhere safe and was being careful not to spend it conspicuously. Marcus shook his head. You didn't see her, detective. She wasn't being careful about spending money she had stolen. She genuinely did not have money to spend. Detective Rodriguez finished his espresso and stared at the empty cup. Mr. Williams, what would you say if I told you that we have not been able to locate the money that was allegedly stolen? What do you mean? The electronic records show transfers to accounts linked to Mrs. Chun, but when we investigated those accounts, they had been closed recently, and the money that was supposedly transferred there is gone. Gone where? That's the question. Mrs. Chin claims she never opened those accounts and never received any money. But the documentation suggests otherwise. Marcus leaned forward. What if someone else opened those accounts using her identity? What if the whole thing was set up to frame her? That's what Mrs. Chin's lawyer is arguing. But the evidence against her is pretty compelling. Compelling or convenient? Detective Rodriguez smiled grimly. You really should have been a cop, Mr. Williams. They talked for another hour, with Marcus asking questions and Detective Rodriguez providing what information he could. By the end of their conversation, Marcus had a clearer picture of the case, but also more questions than answers. Detective, can I ask one more favor? Could you find out exactly when David Peterson was hired, and who made the decision to hire him, and maybe look into his employment history before he joined the foundation? I can do that. But, Mr. Williams, I have to warn you, if you're right about this, and someone is framing Mrs. Chun, then that person is smart and ruthless. They've created a very sophisticated scheme. You need to be careful about how involved you get. What do you mean? I mean that if David Peterson or someone else at the foundation is behind this, they've already shown they're willing to destroy an innocent person's life to cover their tracks. Someone like that might not appreciate a mechanic asking uncomfortable questions. Marcus understood the warning, but he also thought about Sarah's children waiting at home while their mother was accused of crimes she did not commit. I'll be careful, he said, but I can't just walk away from this. As Marcus drove home that evening, he realized he was crossing a line he had never crossed before. He was inserting himself into a criminal investigation based on nothing more than a gut feeling and a brief encounter with a stranger. It was probably foolish, and it could potentially backfire in ways he had not considered. But sometimes, Marcus thought, doing the right thing requires. Tom Marcus woke up on Tuesday morning to find his car windshield cracked. Not just a small chip that might have come from a stray rock, but a spider web pattern that spread across the entire driver's side of the glass. The crack was too extensive and too symmetrical to be accidental. He stood in the parking lot of his apartment complex, coffee mug in hand, staring at the damage. In 15 years of driving, he had never had a windshield spontaneously crack overnight. And the timing just one day after his second conversation with Detective Rodriguez, felt like more than a coincidence. Marcus walked around the car, looking for other signs of tampering. The tires were fine, the body was undamaged, and nothing seemed to be missing from inside the vehicle. Just the windshield, cracked in a way that made the car unsafe to drive, but did not actually prevent it from starting. It was a message, a subtle one, but a message nonetheless. Marcus called his insurance company and arranged for a replacement windshield, then caught a ride to work with his neighbor Carl. As he waited for the glass repair truck to arrive at the shop, he thought about Detective Rodriguez's warning. Someone was smart and ruthless enough to frame an innocent woman for embezzlement. That same person would not hesitate to intimidate a mechanic who was asking uncomfortable questions. The windshield replacement took most of the morning. While Marcus worked on routine repairs, he found himself glancing out the shop windows more frequently than usual, paying attention to unfamiliar cars that parked across the street or people who seemed to be loitering in the area. Around lunchtime, Detective Rodriguez called. "Mr. Williams, I have some information about David Peterson that I think you'll find interesting." "What did you find? Can we meet?" "Same place. Give me an hour." Marcus told Jerry he needed to run an errand and drove to the coffee shop. Detective Rodriguez was already waiting, and he looked more energized than he had during their previous meetings. "David Peterson has an interesting employment history," the detective began without preamble. "Before joining Children's Future Foundation 3 years ago, he worked for a company called Meridian Financial Services." "What kind of company is that?" "Investment management and financial consulting. They handle accounts for small businesses and nonprofit organizations." Marcus felt a spark of recognition. What happened to his job there? He was laid off as part of company-wide restructuring. Or at least, that's the official story. But I did some digging, and it turns out Meridian Financial had some problems around the time Peterson left. "What kind of problems?" "Several of their clients reported discrepancies in their accounts. Small amounts at first, but it added up. The company blamed it on software glitches and eventually compensated the affected clients. But the timing of Peterson's departure was suspicious." Marcus leaned forward. "Did anyone investigate whether Peterson was involved?" "Not really. The amounts were relatively small, spread across multiple accounts, and Meridian wanted to handle it quietly to avoid damage to their reputation. Peterson got a clean recommendation when he left. And then he got hired at Children's Future Foundation, where he would have access to much larger amounts of money and less oversight than he had at Meridian." Marcus thought about this. "So you think he's been planning this for years? Get hired at the foundation, learn the systems, then start stealing money and frame someone else when it's discovered?" "It's possible. But here's the really interesting part. I looked into who made the decision to hire Peterson at the foundation." "Margaret Ross, the executive director?" "No, that's what I expected too. But it turns out the hiring decision was made by the board of directors based on a recommendation from one of their major donors, a man named Robert Castellanos." Marcus did not recognize the name. "Who is Robert Castellanos?" "He's a successful businessman who's been donating to the foundation for about 4 years. He sits on several nonprofit boards and has a reputation for being very involved in the organizations he supports." "And he recommended David Peterson for the job?" "According to the board minutes, yes. Castellanos praised Peterson's qualifications and vouched for his character." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle starting to come together, but he could not see the complete picture yet. "Have you talked to Castellanos?" "Not yet. I wanted to do more research first. But, Mr. Williams, there's something else you should know. I checked into Peterson's finances more carefully after our conversation yesterday, and he's been making regular payments to an offshore account for the past 18 months. The same 18 months when the money allegedly went missing from the foundation." "How much money?" "About $15,000 a month." Marcus did quick math in his head. 15,000 times 18 months was $270,000. Almost exactly the amount that had allegedly been stolen. So Peterson has been moving the stolen money offshore? That's what it looks like. But here's the problem. The payments to the offshore account are documented as investment contributions to a legitimate retirement fund managed by guess who? Robert Castellanos? Bingo. Castellanos runs an investment firm that specializes in retirement planning for nonprofit employees. Perfectly legal, perfectly above board. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the coffee shop. So Peterson steals money from the foundation, sends it to an offshore account controlled by Castellanos, and Castellanos launders it through his investment firm? That's the theory. But proving it is another matter. Both men have plausible explanations for everything. Peterson says he's been making retirement contributions from his legitimate salary. Castellanos says he's providing a service to a nonprofit employee who wants to plan for the future. What about the evidence against Sarah? The electronic records showing transfers to accounts in her name? That's where it gets really clever. I think Peterson created those false accounts using Sarah's identity, transferred the money there temporarily to create a paper trail, then moved it to the offshore account. When the theft was discovered, the false accounts were closed and the money was already gone. Marcus shook his head in amazement. It's like a magic trick. Make the money disappear, but leave behind evidence pointing to someone else. Exactly. And Sarah Chun was the perfect target. She had access to the financial systems. She's relatively new to the country with limited resources to fight back. And she doesn't have the kind of connections that would make people question the evidence against her. Marcus felt a surge of anger on Sarah's behalf. These people destroyed her life just to cover their own theft. If we're right about this, yes. But, Mr. Williams, I have to warn you again. If Peterson and Castellanos are working together, they've put a lot of effort into this scheme. They're not going to want anyone uncovering it. Marcus thought about his cracked windshield. I think they've already noticed that someone is asking questions. He told Detective Rodriguez about the damage to his car. The detective's expression grew serious. Mr. Williams, that changes things. If they're willing to intimidate you, it means we're on the right track. But it also means you could be in danger. What do you want me to do? Stop asking questions, and let Sarah take the blame for something she didn't do. I want you to be smart about this. Let me handle the official investigation. But if you're determined to keep helping, we need to be strategic. They spent the next hour planning their next steps. Detective Rodriguez would continue investigating Peterson and Castellanos through official channels, while Marcus would try to gather information in ways that would not trigger attention from law enforcement. There's one thing that might help, Detective Rodriguez said as they prepared to leave. If we're right about this scheme, Castellanos probably has other victims. He's been running investment scams for nonprofit employees for years, using his reputation and connections to target people who trust him. How does that help us? If we can find other victims, we can establish a pattern. And if we can prove Castellanos has been running similar schemes elsewhere, it becomes much harder for him to claim innocence in this case. Marcus agreed to research Castellanos' business dealings and the other organizations where he served on boards. It was the kind of work that could be done from his computer at home, without attracting the kind of attention that official police inquiries might generate. As Marcus drove home that evening, he noticed a dark blue sedan that seemed to be following him. When he turned left at a traffic light, the sedan turned left. When he changed lanes, the sedan changed lanes. When he pulled into a gas station to test his suspicions, the sedan drove past but slowed down as it passed. Marcus was not paranoid by nature, but he was not naive either. Someone was keeping track of his movements, probably the same someone who had cracked his windshield. The question was whether they were simply trying to intimidate him or whether they had more serious intentions. He filled up his gas tank and bought a coffee he did not want, taking his time and watching the traffic. The blue sedan did not reappear, but Marcus had the feeling he was still being watched. When he finally got home, Marcus double-checked the locks on his door and closed all the blinds before settling down at his kitchen table with his laptop. He had research to do, and he was more motivated than ever to find the truth. Marcus spent 3 hours that night researching Robert Castellanos, and what he found made him understand why Detective Rodriguez had looked so troubled. Castellanos was not just running one investment scam. He had been systematically targeting nonprofit employees across the entire region for at least 5 years. The pattern was always the same. Castellanos would become involved with a charity or foundation as a donor or board member, gain the trust of the staff, then offer to help employees with retirement planning through his investment firm. The amounts were always modest, usually between $10,000 and $20,000 per year, small enough not to trigger immediate suspicion. But Marcus found news articles about 3 other organizations where financial discrepancies had been discovered. In each case, a single employee had been accused of embezzlement. In each case, that employee had been making retirement contributions to investment accounts managed by Castellanos. And, in each case, the accused employee had ultimately been convicted or forced to accept plea deals, while the missing money was never recovered. Marcus made a list of names and organizations, cross-referencing news articles with business records and court documents. The scope of the operation was staggering. Castellanos and his associates had stolen over $2 million from charities across 4 states, systematically destroying the lives of innocent people in the process. Sarah Chun was not the first victim, and if they were not stopped, she would not be the last. Marcus was so absorbed in his research that he almost missed the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. But when he heard the soft scraping of metal against metal, like someone trying to pick a lock, his attention snapped back to his immediate surroundings. He closed his laptop quietly and moved away from the kitchen table. The footsteps had stopped, but Marcus could hear someone breathing on the other side of his door. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. But before he could hit send, he heard a different sound, the footsteps moving away from his door toward the stairwell. Marcus waited 5 minutes, then carefully looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. He opened the door cautiously and found a folded piece of paper on the floor where someone had slipped it under his door. The note was typed on plain white paper. Stop asking questions about things that are not your business. Some problems are more dangerous than they appear. Marcus felt his hands shake slightly as he read the message. This was no longer about intimidation or warnings. Someone had come to his home in the middle of the night and attempted to pick the lock on his door. If he had not been awake and alert, they might have succeeded in entering his apartment. He called Detective Rodriguez immediately. Mr. Williams? It's almost midnight. What's wrong? Marcus explained about the research he had been doing and the attempted break-in. Detective Rodriguez listened without interrupting. Mr. Williams, you need to pack a bag and find somewhere else to stay tonight. Do you have family or friends you can visit? I can probably stay with my neighbor Carl. But, Detective, you need to hear what I found about Castellanos. Tell me tomorrow. Right now, I want you to get somewhere safe. These people are escalating, which means we're close to something they really don't want us to find. Marcus spent the rest of the night on Carl's couch, but he did not sleep much. Every small sound made him alert, and he found himself checking his phone every few minutes for messages or missed calls. The next morning, Detective Rodriguez picked him up early and drove him to the police station. Marcus had never been inside a police station before, and he was struck by how ordinary it looked. Just a building full of people doing their jobs, dealing with the everyday problems of crime and justice. Detective Rodriguez introduced him to a woman named Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her 30s, with short dark hair and intense brown eyes. Mr. Williams, Agent Martinez said as they settled into a small conference room, Detective Rodriguez has briefed me on your involvement in this case. I understand you've done some research that might be relevant to our investigation. You're investigating Robert Castellanos? We've been tracking financial irregularities at several nonprofit organizations across multiple states. Your information about the pattern of accusations against individual employees is very helpful. Marcus shared everything he had discovered the night before, showing them the list of organizations, accused employees, and financial transactions he had documented. Agent Martinez took notes and asked detailed questions about his sources and methodology. Mr. Williams, this is excellent work. You've connected dots that we hadn't seen before. So you can stop them? You can clear Sarah's name. Agent Martinez exchanged a look with Detective Rodriguez. It's not that simple. What you've uncovered gives us a clear pattern, but we still need evidence that will hold up in court. Castellanos and Peterson have been very careful to make everything look legitimate. What about the offshore accounts? The retirement fund payments? Those transactions can be explained away as legitimate business dealings. We need something more concrete. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. Mr. Williams, we have an idea, but it's risky and it would require your cooperation. What kind of idea? Agent Martinez answered. We think Castellanos might try to recruit you into his scheme. Think about it. You're asking questions, you obviously have some financial knowledge, and you work for a non-profit adjacent business that might have access to money. Marcus looked confused. I work at an auto repair shop. We don't have the kind of money these people steal. But they don't know that yet. And Castellanos' pattern is to identify potential allies and try to bring them into his operation rather than simply eliminating threats. You want me to pretend to be interested in working with them? We want you to let them approach you. If they try to recruit you, we can record those conversations and get the evidence we need to prosecute them. Marcus thought about this. It seemed incredibly dangerous, but it also seemed like the only way to clear Sarah's name and prevent Castellanos from destroying more innocent lives. What would I have to do? Nothing at first. Just continue your normal routine. If our theory is right, they'll contact you within the next few days. When they do, you'll be wearing a recording device, and we'll have agents nearby. And if your theory is wrong, if they decide I'm too dangerous to recruit, and they try something more permanent. Agent Martinez was honest with him. That's the risk. But, Mr. Williams, these people have already tried to intimidate you and break into your apartment. They're not going to just leave you alone if you stop investigating. Your best protection now is to help us catch them. Marcus spent an hour learning how to use the recording equipment and discussing the details of the plan. Then, Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez drove him back to his apartment so he could resume his normal routine. Remember, Agent Martinez said as they dropped him off, act natural. Don't do anything that seems like you're trying to provoke contact. If they approach you, just listen and ask the kinds of questions a curious person might ask. Marcus went to work and tried to focus on routine repairs, but his attention kept drifting to every customer who walked through the door, every phone call, every unfamiliar car in the parking lot. The recording device was hidden under his shirt, and he was acutely aware of its presence. The approach came that afternoon, but not in the way he had expected. A well-dressed woman in her 50s walked into the shop and asked to speak with Marcus Williams. She introduced herself as Margaret Ross, the executive director of Children's Future Foundation. Mr. Williams, I understand you've been asking questions about our organization and about Sarah Chun. Marcus tried to appear calm and professional. I met Sarah at the store and heard she was in some trouble. I was just concerned. That's very compassionate of you. I was wondering if you might be willing to meet with me and one of our board members to discuss the situation. We believe there may have been some misunderstandings about what happened. What kind of misunderstandings? It's complicated, but I think you might be able to help us resolve this matter in a way that benefits everyone involved, including Sarah. Margaret Ross was not who Marcus had expected to make contact, but she was clearly speaking on behalf of Castellanos and Peterson. This was the recruitment attempt Agent Martinez had predicted. I'd be willing to listen, Marcus said carefully. Excellent. Could you meet us this evening? There's a restaurant called Morelli's on the west side of town. Say 7 o'clock. Marcus agreed to the meeting, and Margaret Ross left the shop. As soon as she was gone, he called Agent Martinez to report the contact. Perfect, Agent Martinez said. This is exactly what we hoped would happen. Just remember to stay calm, and let them do most of the talking. That evening, Marcus arrived at Morelli's 10 minutes early and was directed to a private dining room in the back of the restaurant. Margaret Ross was already there, along with a man Marcus recognized from his research as Robert Castellanos. Castellanos was in his 60s, with silver hair and expensive clothes. He had the kind of confident demeanor that suggested he was used to being the smartest person in any room. Mr. Williams, Castellanos said, standing to shake hands. Margaret has told me about your interest in the unfortunate situation with Miss Chun. I appreciate your concern for her welfare. They ordered dinner and made small talk for the first few minutes. Then, Castellanos got to the point. Mr. Williams, I'm going to be direct with you. Sarah Chun is guilty of embezzling money from the foundation. The evidence is overwhelming. But that doesn't mean her life has to be ruined. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes good people make bad choices when they're under financial pressure. Sarah has 3 children and was struggling to make ends meet. She made a mistake, but she's not a criminal mastermind. Marcus listened, letting his genuine confusion show on his face. The thing is, Castellanos continued, the money Sarah took has been recovered, through certain investment strategies I've been implementing on behalf of the foundation. We could make this whole situation go away if Sarah is willing to cooperate. Cooperate how? Margaret Ross leaned forward. By accepting responsibility for her actions and agreeing to work with us to prevent similar problems in the future. Marcus was beginning to understand. They wanted Sarah to plead guilty in exchange for a light sentence, which would close the investigation and prevent anyone from digging deeper into Castellanos' operation. But what does that have to do with me? Marcus asked. Castellanos smiled. You've demonstrated excellent investigative instincts, Mr. Williams. And you clearly care about justice and helping people in difficult situations. I think you could be very valuable to our organization. I'm a mechanic. I don't know anything about running a nonprofit. You'd be surprised how transferable your skills are. We could use someone with your attention to detail and your discretion to help us manage some of our more sensitive operations. This was it. They were offering to bring him into their scheme. Marcus forced himself to appear interested while feeling disgusted by what they were suggesting. What kind of operations? Financial management, investment oversight, problem solving. The kind of work that requires someone who can think creatively and handle complex situations. The conversation continued for another hour, with Castellanos and Margaret Ross gradually revealing more about their operation while trying to gauge Marcus's willingness to participate. By the time Marcus left the restaurant, he had enough recorded evidence to convict both of them. But, as he walked to his car, Marcus realized that the most dangerous part of his involvement was just beginning. Once Castellanos and Peterson discovered that their recruitment attempt had been a trap, they would stop trying to win Marcus over and start trying to eliminate him permanently. The final confrontation was coming, and Marcus was no longer just a concerned citizen trying to help an innocent woman. He was a key witness in a federal investigation, and that made him a target for people who had already shown they were willing to destroy anyone who threatened their operation. 3 days later, the FBI arrested Robert Castellanos, David Peterson, and Margaret Ross on charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and mail fraud. Sarah Chun was completely exonerated, and the charges against her were formally dropped. Marcus testified before a federal grand jury, and later at the trial that sent all 3 conspirators to prison for terms ranging from 15 to 25 years. The money stolen from multiple organizations was recovered and returned to the charities that had been victimized. Sarah Chun was offered her job back at Children's Future Foundation, but she chose instead to start fresh with a different organization. She and Marcus stayed in touch, and 6 months after the trial, she invited him and Emma to dinner at her house to meet her children. I still don't understand why you got involved, Sarah said as they cleaned up after dinner. You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain by helping. Marcus thought about how to answer that. I think sometimes we're put in situations where we have a chance to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. If I hadn't helped you buy medicine that night, I never would have been a witness to your character. And if I hadn't been a witness to your character, I never would have questioned the charges against you. So you think it was meant to happen? I think you're a good person who deserved help when you needed it. And I think your children deserve to have their mother's name cleared. Sarah's daughter Emma, who was now fully recovered from her fever, brought Marcus a drawing she had made. It showed 2 people standing together in front of a store, with the word hero written in crayon at the top. That's you and my mommy, Emma explained. You're the hero who saved our family. Marcus looked at the drawing, then at Sarah and her 3 children, then at his own daughter Emma, who was playing with Sarah's youngest son David. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes helping a stranger in a grocery store can change everything for both of you. And sometimes, when we choose to see the person behind the struggle rather than just walking past, we discover that we have more power to make a difference than we ever imagined possible. What Marcus discovered over the next several hours would reshape his understanding of the case and reveal the true scope of the scheme that had targeted Sarah Chun. But it would also put him in more danger than he had realized, and force him to make decisions about how far he was willing to go to help someone he barely knew. As he worked late into the night, Marcus had no way of knowing that Robert Castellanos was at that very moment having a phone conversation about the problem that Marcus Williams had become, or that David Peterson had suggested a permanent solution to that problem. The game Marcus had unwittingly entered was more complex and more dangerous than he had imagined. But by the time he understood the true stakes, it would be too late to walk away. King risks. And if there was even a chance that Sarah Chun was innocent and someone else was destroying her life for their own gain, then the risk was worth taking. What Marcus did not realize as he pulled into his apartment complex was that someone had already noticed his interest in the case. Someone who had access to information about police investigations and who understood exactly how dangerous an observant mechanic with good instincts could be to a carefully constructed plan. The next phase of Marcus's involvement in Sarah Chen's case would test not only his determination to help an innocent person, but also his ability to protect himself and the people he cared about from consequences he had never anticipated. Marcus had never been the type to get involved in other people's problems. His philosophy had always been to mind his own business, work hard, and take care of his own responsibilities. But something about this situation felt different. Maybe it was Sarah's dignity in the face of struggle, or maybe it was the thought of her 3 children wondering why their mother was being accused of something she did not do. Whatever the reason, Marcus found himself making a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him well. He was going to find out what really happened to the money at Children's Future Foundation. Not because he was qualified to investigate financial crimes, but because sometimes the right thing to do is also the most difficult thing to do. And sometimes, a chance encounter in a grocery store is the beginning of a much larger story about justice, truth, and the ways that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences in each other's lives. It meant feeling better about his day than he had in weeks. There was something deeply satisfying about being able to help someone who really needed it. It reminded him why he had always liked his job fixing cars. People brought him their problems, and he found ways to solve them. He spent the evening thinking about Sarah and her 3 children. He hoped Sarah's fever would break soon and that David was managing okay as the temporary caretaker. There was something about the family dynamic that spoke to him, maybe because it reminded him of his own childhood when his sister looked after him while their mother worked late shifts. What Marcus did not know, as he went to bed that night, was that his simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would change both of their lives in ways he could never have imagined. Sarah Chun was not just a struggling single mother trying to make ends meet. She was someone whose story would challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about judgment, assumptions, and the hidden complexities of other people's lives. The receipt from their transaction at Walmart would become one of the most important pieces of paper either of them ever possessed, though neither of them knew it yet. And the name Sarah Chun, which had sounded familiar to Marcus but which he could not quite place, would soon become impossible for him to forget. But that night, Marcus simply felt good about helping someone in need. He fell asleep thinking about his daughter Emma, and hoping that if she ever found herself in a difficult situation, someone kind would be there to help her too. Sometimes the most significant moments in our lives begin with the smallest gestures, with decisions that seem ordinary at the time, but prove to be anything but ordinary in their consequences. The thunderstorm that had been threatening all week finally arrived around midnight, bringing with it rain that would continue for 3 days and change the trajectory of both Marcus and Sarah's lives in ways that neither of them could possibly have foreseen.